Hello, everyone, and welcome to this live stream edition of the Comical Heathen podcast. It's a podcast I started a few years ago because I'm supposedly writing a book about satire. I started interviewing my comedy friends and other writers and people that I knew and networked with and turned the conversations into this podcast. And I've also taken this podcast on the road. Hey, by the way, I'm your host, Dr. Jerry Jaffe, the world's most highly educated stand-up comedian. And I was saying, after I did the podcast for a couple of years, I developed a live version. And the live version is why we're doing this today, because the live version includes a Q&A with the audience. And it's always a fun part of the show, a little interactive, a little improv, a little bit of Stump the Schwami. Even the world's most highly educated stand-up comedian doesn't know everything. So because the live show Q&A was so much fun, I tried to bring it into the podcast. So every once in a while, I do these live Q&A episodes. So I really do want your questions and comments. Some people have emailed some stuff ahead, and we also have the comment section live right now. So feel free, anyone, to leave comments or leave questions, and we'll try to get to them. Now, when you do a Q&A, I cannot do this alone. So I've brought in a special guest co-host who's actually, you heard his voice, you hear his voice. He's waking up. He's almost here. Musician, writer, and one of my bestest and longest friends. Please welcome to the show today's guest co-host, Jeff Geddert.
Hey, hello and good morning and good evening over on the other side of the world. I'm broadcasting live from Tokyo, Japan, where we all talk exactly like this. Yeah, it's like 7 a.m. here.
7 a.m.? But I heard from QAnon that Japan doesn't exist, so how can it be 7 a.m. over there?
No, there are actually QAnon people here in Tokyo. There's they did a little protest. There was 5 of them walking down the street of Tokyo. It's oh my God, how embarrassing. Go back, get away, go back where you were.
Jeff and I both taught English in Japan. I did it back in the 90s. He's still there doing whatever the hell he does. But it's my dream, Jeff, that you are teaching any students that you work with to use your radio voice when they speak English.
That's right. That's right. There we go. That's right. Yeah, actually, I do pick up the occasional paycheck for doing voice stuff as well. Strangely enough. But it's awesome to be here with a very old friend. I was thinking about that because we go back quite a ways, an embarrassing number of years. And it's awesome to just be here and to not have anything to promote and to not be, the whole self-doing thing. I have no dog in this pony. I'm in the game, but not of it. And I'm not even worried about being canceled. So go ahead, name any race and I'll tell you what's wrong with those people.
So you have a clear idea of your branding? None.
And bingo. Yeah. NA does not apply. I'm other. That's it. That's the other branding.
It was funny. I was thinking about, because we've known each other for so long, what I might say when I introduced you. And all the things that you might plug are all stuff from years ago. You were the voice on this 10 years ago. You did such and such broadcast 15 years ago. I couldn't think of anything you've done in the past 3 months that needs to be mentioned.
I did a Seiko commercial last year that was pretty cool.
Excellent.
But that's I don't know.
I don't know either.
So
go ahead. You were doing what?
I was doing podcasts back in 2006. God damn it.
It's early adopter.
No, maybe in 2004, before it was, as soon as I realized how low the bar to entry was, I jumped on it. But I haven't done that long.
Well, even though Jeff doesn't have any credits to claim, I do want to mention that I started podcasting in the early 10s, and this is my third different podcast, and Mr. Geddert has helped me in all 3. He's a very talented musician and audio engineer, and so I appreciate all of his feedback and input along the way of my learning how to do these podcasts. And I would say if you were an early adopter, if I'm doing anything involving media or technology, I'm probably 3 years behind the mark. If I wake up one day and want to do a podcast, it's already 3 years too late to do a podcast. So
yeah. No, but it's been cool being involved in yours as well. is the thing I did a long time ago. It's like you've got interesting content and just topics I'm interested in. So that stuff's fun to do. But yeah, podcasting, I don't think you're currently the only person doing it.
No, I've heard of one or two others, and they seem to be splitting the pie of the audience where everyone else has like a 99.99% market share, and I have like 12 people. So to the 12 people listening to this podcast, I thank you.
There we go. Thank you for your patronage.
Yes, absolutely.
But I will say it is also cool. Like today we're using a new technology for people who don't know at home. But it's behind the scenes kind of inside baseball stuff. But It's interesting to see how this evolves over time.
Yes.
And it just becomes easier and easier to do, frankly.
Well, as I've made more progress with the book, and I am slowly writing a book, the raison d'etre for doing this podcast kind of like has diminishing returns. Like probably nothing Mike Kaplan says today on this episode will appear in the book because the book is too far along. Oh, hey, Jeff, I just mentioned Mike Kaplan's name out of the blue. Mike Kaplan is a hilarious comedian who kindly let me interview him for the normal editions of this podcast last year. So there's a great Mike Kaplan interview that I will put in the post. I'll put a link in the description of this podcast eventually.
Awesome.
And when I interviewed him last year, the material that I got from him, including about his most recent #1 comedy album, which is known as AKA, we talked about that and just ... Like I was able to fold his commentary and meaningful quotes into the text of the book. Kind of going forward, like that's less of a reality. So I'm definitely finding like what else can I do with this podcast besides write a book?
Where else can you apply these things? Well, it seems to be, your own live shows and whatnot, and like it's like both. It's like stand up and like the hour-long show, the Comical Heathen live show. Is cross promotional stuff there, and then Mike Kaplan's going to be on here. We're excited to have him, and gets a little cross promotion. It's like I think it all eventually levels out in this one big ocean as people cross promoting their stuff into oblivion.
Indeed,
but a happy, upbeat oblivion.
Yes. So we do have a YouTube channel, and all of my content, including the previous podcast, Gold Star Classroom, as well as all the Comical Heathen interviews and episodes, are available through the YouTube channel. And then I just this month, Jeff, started a Twitch channel. So that's
a Twitch channel.
Yeah.
My gosh, why? What in the world, Jerry? Could that be?
I'm also trying to figure it out. But what's cool is Twitch is like a platform where people basically make their own TV shows, and it's mostly fan based. And a large percentage of what is streamed on Twitch is gaming. So I've done a little bit of that just because I like to play video games. But
okay. It's like I'm just like the idea. You start off as like, well, it's like a television show, and then you can watch people play games. That is not the CBS, ABC, NBC that I recall from growing up.
It ain't
was
MASH.
Like, like when on the old dial televisions where you had the channel 2 through channel 13, you never would put it on channel 5, and there'd be somebody playing Call of Duty.
No, but you're never going to put it on Twitch and see Barney Miller either. But it's more of a community as you do online. It's like an online community. So people who have like embraced Twitch, even if they get a couple of hundred followers, they're like, they watch them game, they chat, they have other media like Discord channels where they can communicate. So it makes these little communities.
So people can grow. People have common interests, and they have a chance to interact with one another, and they can bond in a way that is no longer physically possible due to our addiction to the internet.
Correct. So instead, we use our addiction to the internet to bond virtually through latex screens and things. So, yes. Wow. So, I mean, these are all things we're exploring. And one of the things we're exploring, Jeff, I've done a few of these over the past couple of years, is doing live episodes of the Comical Heathen themed around the Q&A format.
Sure.
Another famous podcaster who you and I both admire, Neil deGrasse Tyson, and Star Talk, will occasionally do episodes where he just brings on a comedic co-host of some kind, and they ask him questions about the topic of the day.
Chuck, nice.
And they get the questions. Well, we got the questions from the interwebs. I mean, I actually put Jeff in charge of gathering the questions. I've not seen any of the questions. I've not vetted any of the questions. My answer to every single question might be, I don't know. I did do a Facebook thread a few days ago, and I just sincerely asked what people think of when people say, I'm not religious, but I'm spiritual. And that got a lot of activity, like 50, 60 comments. So that inspired
Yeah.
us to make the theme of today's live Q&A, religion versus spirituality.
Religion versus spirituality. Now, that's
Yeah.
one we've heard many, many times.
Yes.
And I feel like we have a pretty clear idea what religion is.
Right.
But the
Yes.
idea of spirituality, I get the impression, is more of the kind of obscure, kind of unknown, less defined thing.
Yeah.
What's your take on that? I mean, what do you how would you explain to a 5-year-old child from Mars the difference between religion and spirituality?
Well, I will say the first thing I thought of when I started thinking about this topic was that what we need is a celebrity death match. Like the word versus became very interesting. I want to see religion versus spirituality, like Godzilla versus King Kong.
Yeah.
Yes, some
Oh,
kind of.
Jamil, like just Royce, like that's good. It's a good start because just in number of followers, if you ask people around the world, how are you spiritual or are you religious? How would you describe yourself? Which would have the larger following?
So one of my favorite things to tell classes, and you can verify this with a simple internet search if you're interested, is that it's hard to use round numbers, and it sometimes is hard to define the word religion. But anthropologists and sociologists estimate that there's about 10,000 religions on the earth today.
Mm-hmm.
And there have been, and again, who knows, but estimates made by the same types of specialists put the number around 1 million religions have popped up around the earth during human history.
But that's including like the Church of the Subgenius and
Well, I mean, probably.
goofy stuff.
Well, it depends how broadly or narrowly you want to define religion, but that's all. That's what the first question is, right? If you're going to say
Sure.
religion versus spirituality, then the word religion is not like contained in one Bible.
Yeah, certainly. Yeah. I mean,
So
if there's a million religions, it sounds like you're defining them pretty broadly, but yeah, it's certainly not the way that it's just like synonymous for Christianity or whatever that it tends to be in the States.
Well, like just something, whether it's the ancient Greek or Roman gods or Hinduism, when you have a pantheon, that like multiplies the problems, right?
I had a pantheon. I went to the doctor.
Oh, that's probably from your Balzac. You're reading too much poetry.
Indeed.
But so the point is, when you have a pantheon, you could say like there's the Greek gods, but are you worshiping Zeus? And if you worship Zeus, does that mean you do or don't worship the other gods? Do you go to some temples or not? So like, is it
exactly
100 religions in one religion, or is it one religion with 100 religions inside of it?
There's that, and there's also the idea right now that a lot of people, they might describe themselves as spiritual, and they might like follow the teachings of Jesus, but they wouldn't describe themselves as religious. But they do fall into the category or the box of one particular religion. So if it's like, and part of that is just social. In peer pressure, in a way, it can be, or the house you're raised in, or your circumstances, your environment. So how many people in ancient Greece is like, so you worship that Zeus? Yeah, Zeus, he's a good guy. How many people in ancient Greece just going along with what everybody else is saying?
Yes. and guaranteed there were atheists as well. Like, I'm sure there were people going, Zeus, yeah, right, here, just buy a shoe. Like, don't bother me with your Zeus, I'm just trying to sell shoes here.
There we go. Sandals.
Sandals. That's big business in the ancient Greeks. And then, so if we say, okay, so what's the word spiritual mean? When we're in our like Western Judeo-Christian context, we're generally talking about people, and here's a generalization, who have lost interest in the organized religion they were raised with, if any.
Sure.
But still have a feeling of something inside of them that is satisfied by either ritual or myth or just a worldview. And so it's like
Hmm.
having a worldview that may or may not include supernaturalism, but doesn't include dogmatic organized religion.
Yeah, it sounds like, yeah, the organized religion, the idea of standing in a big room full of
Right.
people with one guy at the end telling everybody what God thinks.
Yes.
There's
Yes.
people who get turned off of that idea, I think, are the ones who describe themselves as
Yes.
spiritual.
Now, what fills in for spiritual could be any number of things. I mean, I'm in the theater arts, and for some people, they could be very.
Oh my God, it's you! You're in a large room full of people, and there's one guy at the end of the room who's telling everybody what you think.
Yes, well, I mean, you can make a model out of
Jerry, you're my
traditional.
new God.
I could use some disciples. There are definitely Jerry disciples out there in the theater world. Sound off if you know who you are. Probably you are one of them, actually, Jeff Geddert.
I am indeed. I will talk to that. It's true. No, by the way, I'm broadcasting today from Japan. The person who brought me to Japan was Dr. Jerry Jaffe.
My pleasure.
Smuggled me in a suitcase, just like Carlos Ghosn.
Yep. And when I started my community theater over there for a couple of years, you were in plays, a couple of the plays we did.
Yeah, Woody Allen God and some other things, and David Mamet. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's good times.
Good times.
But a traditional play where there's like a director and a text, that is like a priest who interprets the holy book. The actors are like disciples that
you
come
do
in
take your job seriously
for weeks and months. There might be a little brainstorming going on, yeah. Weeks and months. But the Kool-Aid is just Kool-Aid. I love sweet drinks, so don't worry about that.
Oh, good.
And then the audience is like a congregation that comes and listens to the disciples tell the story taught to them by the director.
Yep. That whole analogy is playing out.
And then there's some, when we could do, I'm going to stop with just a sentence. I could probably make the next live Q&A about how the similarities and differences between theater and church.
That's a good one. Yeah. Make a note of that one, because that's an interesting one.
I could keep going, but I won't.
The communal thing, the coming together and sitting down and hearing a story together. I mean, it's also, that you could, like, even around the campfire, that kind of thing happens.
Oh, sure.
That's interesting.
So, what else do you got, Mr. Geddert? First, things that you wanted to ask, but you also were in charge of culling and collating actual questions or comments for us to react to.
That's right. So I have a list of your listeners / readers / viewers comments here. And I can reel off some of these, and perhaps you can respond to them with whatever answer comes to your mind. First up, we have Duke Jupiter from Intercourse, Pennsylvania, writes, Dear Jerry, in the last episode, you asked about, is Jedi a religion? But I wasn't able to listen all the way to the end of the podcast because I was busy blowing up the Death Star. So what'd you guys figure out? Is Jedi a religion or not?
So on the left hand, that actually feeds into your comment earlier, Jeff, just about, like, do parody religions count as religions? The creator of the Church of the Flying Spaghetti Monster was sort of accused of, you're not a religion, it's a parody religion. And his retort, which you can find this on his website, is, what's the difference? Like,
that's a good one.
Yeah. But the part of what that was a question that originally came from the live show. Actually, someone asked me that in the live show, and we paid it forward into one of the live stream Q&As. And the one other interesting detail I brought up at the time, and Jeff, I want to hear what you think as well, is just that there was a period where, like when you do a census in America, and nowadays they don't ask typically about religion, or sometimes they'll have like a supplemental census that only like 1% of the people get, but it has more questions on it.
Sure.
So there was a span in the early 2000s where some census taking exercises in different countries, not America, were asking about what religion people were. And people all over the world started filling in Jedi as a protest vote.
I think it was just in England, if I recall.
It was in England. Australia had some. I feel like New Zealand did as well, but if that's not right, my apologies to the 3 or 4 people who live there.
It insulted the Maori culture.
Yes. um, sorry, I lived in New Zealand for 6 years, as you know, Jeff. Probably the 12 listeners to this podcast do as well. Just to say, I have many Maori friends and have a great respect for Maori culture. But there is not many of them living down under. So
Oh,
yeah, no, the country has about 4 to 5 million people is the current population. I think they might have tipped 5 million in recent years. So that's, Ohio has like 8 million. So, do the math. But all sarcasm aside, I think there might have been some people in New Zealand who also filled in census taking exercises with Jedi as a religion. And it became a little bit like our reality shows that have voting. Sometimes these, like, I guess we'll say trolls will decide online to vote for the worst singer or the worst comedian to keep them in the show longer.
Yeah.
So I think there was like a cousin to that. Like there was an online movement's too strong of a word, online chatter where people said we should start putting in Jedi to these census takers. And then some people did it. So there's some like Venn diagram that overlaps some agitators.
Well, if it's a movement, does that make it a religion?
Yeah, but is trolling a religion then?
It's trolling. It would certainly seem to be, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Man. Yeah, no, and the other thing it made me think too is about the idea of a parody or a satire religion.
Mm-hmm.
Like I was reading up on these Satanists and the modern Satanists I've known with they do like we're gonna put our statue of Baphomet there in your public square because you got the 10 Commandments up there. It's like, okay, that's like pretty clearly satire. But I'd also heard about this Anton LaVey Satanism and seen these scary black and white photos from the past.
Yes.
And I'm reading up on this. No, it's damn near the same thing. It seems like the majority of Satanists I've found and read up on a little bit, not a lot, seem to be of the same kind of protesting or responding to what's going on in society ilk. Now, if I'm defaming anybody, if you're an actual Satanist, please let us know in the comments.
Yes.
If I'm misrepresenting you.
Yes, and a good example of that is the Satanic 10 Commandments, which if you take the word satanic out of it, it's just like a protest vote. Like, wouldn't it be better if the 10 Commandments were like this?
Yeah, exactly.
All
right.
Go ahead. I was going to say that, one more thing about Jediism is that in the movies, they are like described as a mystic order. And in the first 3 movies, if you think of them as a mystic order, we don't learn much about them.
Yep.
It is like a mysterious mystic order. But in the prequels, one of the mistakes that George Lucas was criticized for was trying to explain Jediism.
Yeah, fair enough.
Yeah. Fair enough. It's better as a mystical mystery.
It's like it's what you don't know. It's the beginning of Jaws when you can't see the shark.
Yes. Yep. Good comparison. You get a gold star. A for
awesome,
Jeff.
Awesome.
All right. How about another question?
Another question. Totally my real name at fake email address writes, Dear Jerry, when I'm walking down the street and I peek inside the shop windows of Catholicism, I see a very solemn interior with a lot of purple and gold colors inside and people acting very respectfully. And when I peek next door in the windows of Protestantism, I see a different vibe and people are enjoying all kinds of different stuff and they're doing different things, but they seem to be enjoying it more. What do I see when I peek inside the windows of atheism?
You see, I can't speak for a whole group of people who by nature are not coming together to write dogmatic screeds. But I think you will see a group of people, most of whom have been freed from a mental burden that occupies real estate in your brain and in your moral compass. And that doesn't make atheists good people or bad people, although statistically atheists commit less crimes. And statistically, prisons have a very large percentage of believers imprisoned.
Imprisoned.
In prison, yes. The vast
Oh,
majority of people imprisoned in the United States are adherents of one religion or church or another.
that's interesting.
Um, but and I can give you a good quick metaphor. Again, we're a couple of minutes away from 6:30, so I want to make sure we get Mike in on time. But I'll give you a quick metaphor. When I lived in New Zealand, there was a socialized medicine, universal healthcare.
Sure.
And was it perfect? No. Was it pretty good? Yes. But you know what it came with that Americans can't really appreciate
What's
is
that,
that
Jerry?
you never had to worry about your insurance.
You didn't have to think about it.
Yes.
There's not the chance that you're going to fall ill and then somebody's going to take away your house as a
Yes.
result of medical bills.
Yes. I mean, at the beginning of the year, my wife's insurance just changed. And I won't even go into all the rigmarole,
Same
but
wife.
just think about all the mental effort that took. Their company had to shop policies, then they had to do all the effort to change it, and then all
Yeah.
the employees had to be impacted by that. And even if there were good things or bad things about it, some employees, such as my partner, were very negatively impacted. It caused a lot of problems
Oof.
for our family, and then that causes worry, and then that causes how much time are you spending in your day worrying about your health care.
And then what does that
And
stress add to future health problems
yes,
too?
whereas in New Zealand, if someone had a health problem, they could worry about like something's wrong with my kidney. But with that worry was not, how am I going to pay for it? What's my employer going to do? Do I have to apply for workman's comp? Like all of this other mental space. And I'm going through that for a minute because I think that's what you would
Yeah.
see if you looked into the window shop of atheism, is you would see a group of
Ah,
people whose minds and consciousnesses are not being occupied
I see.
by those concerns anymore.
Freed up. Hey,
Yeah.
like just the fact that you mentioned you live in New Zealand, right quick, you also
Mm-hmm.
lived in Japan. So,
Yes.
along with the theme of today of religion
Yep.
versus spirituality, what would you say, or would you say Japanese people are more religious or more spiritual or neither? And please
Mm-hmm.
state your answer in the form of a sweeping generalization.
Okay. Incoming sweeping generalization. I lived there for 4 years. You've lived, and I visited many times besides that. You've lived there longer. I've done some reading. I speak a small amount of Japanese and less since I've forgotten most of it. And I saw a nice description in a book I read, which stuck with me, which was which was this. So here's my sweeping generalization:
There we go.
that the majority of Japanese people participate in the ritual and trappings and ceremonies, and even doing so is important.
Hmm.
But that does not equate to being a believer or even being an atheist. Almost like a Jewish
Hmm.
people who celebrate Purim because it's a family event and they like the food, are Catholic people who go to church for big services like Easter, but aren't committed to the idea of God or Catholicism or Judaism.
Okay.
I think a lot of Japanese people are some variation of that they're not committed to, like in Shintoism and the kami, the spirits, that all these spirits absolutely must exist. But the
They're
idea of going to the shrine, doing the
going through the
prayers, the dishes,
paces. They like
has
the wallpaper, but they're not
has
necessarily.
meaning for them.
Gotcha.
And I do think, Jeff, and I'll make this my last comment, and then we'll bring Mike on.
Yep.
Is just that when we think of religion versus spiritualism, one of the places that Westerners go to fill the need, that being unsatisfied with their dogmatic religious upbringing or households, is Eastern traditions. And that was an irritant of mine when I was in Japan. Someone would go and they'd go to a shrine, and if they had a personal experience that was meaningful to them, please, I support that 100%. But if I'm having drinks with them afterwards and I have to listen to them babble about their misunderstandings of Shinto or Buddhism or what the architecture of a shrine is. So in other words, it was like a very superficial experience that didn't really explore or respect what it might mean for Japanese or people from other East Asian cultures.
Sure, it just falls into the oversimplifications of the same camp as like the nail that sticks up gets hammered down is the phrase you always hear.
Yes. I thought it was the monkey that sticks up, gets hammered down with a banana, and then falls out of a tree. But I might be mixing two
I heard like the
sayings
monkey.
together.
The monkey misses the branch is one.
Oh,
Like
well, there's
even monkeys miss
monkeys
the
fall-
branch is the.
I heard it as even monkeys fall from trees, but you are a much better translator than me, so yours is probably closer.
Either way, ass on the ground.
Yep. Well, my ass is on the ground right now, but I'm going to use my ass, or I should say, I'm going to use my mouth. Well, this is like the worst intro in the history of intros. Holy fuck. All right. First of all, yeah, Jeff, thank you for laughing because your laughter is like a palate cleanser. Hey, viewers and listeners at home. It is now my pleasure to bring to this show, this live stream, our special guest, comedian who first came to national consciousness probably in 2010 on Last Comic Standing, but has done many amazing things and many television appearances and many gigs, including in 2020 releasing his most recent comedy album, AKA, which went to #1. So please welcome to the show my good friend and one of my favorite comedians, Mike Kaplan. Mike, how are you?
Hey, thank you so much. Can you see me and hear me acceptably?
I can see you and hear you, and I made a special banner just for you in case we couldn't see you. And now I'm going to show the banner, and it says
Please.
Mike Kaplan on the phone.
There we go.
Oh, yeah. So thank you for being a part of my day, which includes I'm now riding in a car back from Westchester to Brooklyn, where I live, and have another show. And happy to make this car a third show. I thought I would be driving and as such unable for you to unable to be seen by you. But my friend Liz Glazer, wonderful comedian, dear friend, she was on the show as well and happened to be driving to and from and to Brooklyn. So I'm here. I am on the road. I am on the phone, and I'm glad that that banner indicating as such is. And not only is the banner correct, but people can confirm with their own eyes that there definitely is at least like a real good CGI of trees traveling by this window.
Excellent green screen. So did I infer from what you said that you're in the car with another comedian right now?
That's right. Liz Glazer is another comedian. She is driving the car, and she is a generous person who has willingly subjected herself to hearing only half of our conversation, but probably more than half, because my guess is that I'm going to say more than you, if not only because that is, especially when I'm a guest on other people's podcasts. When I'm on my own podcast, I do my best to do less than half the talking, but I feel like this is my best job of complimenting you / taking the onus off of myself, or the responsibility to say, like, you're probably such a great host that you'll ask such short, efficient questions that'll just give me free reign to talk as long as I want to, and then Liz won't wonder what the question was.
Okay, so thank you, Liz, for driving. Tell Liz I want her to be on my podcast later. I'll interview her separately. And then 3, let's get started, Mike. The theme of today's podcast is just the general umbrella: religion versus spirituality. Where do you come down on that?
Thank you. On the question of, now I'm going to answer every question like I'm being interviewed on TV, where they're like, look.
Oh, we lost Mike there for a second. Mike, you still there?
Hey.
There we
Oh, yep, he's cutting in and out. Maybe they're going through a tunnel in upstate New York. I don't know.
Did I disappear and return?
Now
you did.
Back.
You've just returned, but we didn't have you for like 20 seconds.
I don't hear you again. Do you still hear me?
We hear you. We hear you.
Yeah, we can hear you.
I understand that you can hear me, but I can't hear you. So I don't know if I'll have to leave and come back. But I will answer this question in the meantime of where I come down. The reason that a thing happened was I had set an alarm to make sure that I remembered to get on to this show at this time, but I didn't turn off the snooze, so the alarm went off again on the phone that I'm using, and then not ruined everything, but certainly caused me to be saying this right now. Okay, so on the question of religion, quote unquote, versus spirituality, I will say, like, if I had to pick one, which I'm glad I don't. I mean, the way that I think of them as different is that religion is, to paint in very broad strokes, religion is communal and something that is often done either in groups, or even if you're not doing it in groups, like if you are praying at a certain time of day alone in your house, you might be doing it knowing that other people are doing that, or like Jews at sundown lighting candles on the Sabbath, for example, like, oh, this is the time that I know all around this time zone, at least, then all around the world people are lighting candles as well in a similar way. There's something communal about religion, and spirituality can be more individual, and there can be, of course, like a Venn diagram overlap of religion and spirituality, in that perhaps the things that you find truly, meaningful independently, individually in your own life and experience do align with some practices that would be called religious as well. And perhaps I feel like so I've been learning a lot about Buddhism recently, specifically Tibetan debate is something that I'm learning with my friend Gus, who is a Buddhist. And one of the ways that Tibetan debate operates is you have debates about comparing two different things. You say, how does this thing compare with that thing? And sometimes the two things are mutually inclusive. Like if you said, how do cats compare with felines? You would say, they, I think, are mutually inclusive, because can you think of anything that's a cat that's not a feline, or anything that's a feline but it's not a cat? Then the question, then they could be mutually inclusive. They could be like one contains the other as a subset, like a Venn diagram where one is subsumed. Like if you said cat, how do they compare cats and mammals? Okay, well, between them, there are this many possibilities. There are things that are mammals but not cats. There are things that are cats and mammals, but there's things that are neither cats nor mammals. So they call that three possibilities. It's either there's something that's both, something that's one but not the other, and something that's neither. Then so that's three possibilities. Now there's things that are four possibilities. So something that's four possibilities includes like, how do they compare, let's say, a wife and a mother? Like you could name a person who is a wife and a mother, both. You can name somebody who's a wife but not a mother. You can name somebody that's a mother but not a wife. And you could name somebody or something that is neither a mother nor a wife. For example, a rock. A rock is a classic go-to example of things that are anything that are for any non-rock out there.
Yeah.
So
Dwayne Johnson.
Spirituality and religion. How do those? I think that those compare with four possibilities as well. In that there are definitely some activities, some aspects, some practices, some experiences, some ways of being that are both religious and spiritual for some people, depending on who they are and how they live. There are definitely. I think there's definitely spirituality that is not connected to religion. If people have a disconnected from religion prayer practice or meditation practice or exercise regimen. For the people who say I'm spiritual but not religious, I'm not religious but I am spiritual. Like, sure. And are there things that are religious but not spiritual? I feel like there oughtn't be. I think the goal would be for there to be as much of an overlap as possible, that something is personally meaningful to you as well as connecting you to a larger whole. But I think that an example, there's a book that I read called Is, which is a collection of poems by a heretical Jewish poet of a kind. And one of the poems talks about, I don't know the exact wording, but essentially he says, like, as a believing person, I have more in common with the atheist who dances than the pious person sitting in church on Sunday, or sitting at synagogue on Saturday, or sitting in the mosque on the appropriate day, or wherever it is, but who is not feeling connected, who is like just going through the motions, who's just checking the box. So I think that would be an example of potentially religious but not spiritual, or even, let's say, to be more generous, religious but not spiritual could include people who are culturally Jewish or Catholic, who they're like, I don't consider myself religious, but I am a Jew, I am a Catholic. Like, I love my grandmother, and so I'm happy to go with her to a ceremony, or I'm happy to have this person, lead my wedding, or I feel I like the songs, I like whatever it is. And then there's definitely some aspects of it. I guess an argument could be made that there's nothing that's neither spiritual nor religious based on some definitions. But for,
Sure.
I think, by an atheist's definition, if they say that they're not spiritual and they're not religious, then that is the one that is neither. Also, I am, let's see here.
Yes.
I will perhaps, because I can't hear you.
Yes.
Log off briefly and then log back on.
Okay.
And
excellent. Thank you.
You get your next question ready, and
All right.
All right. What a great. This is Mike. By the way, Mike is so great, smart, thoughtful. He's a very clever writer. And go listen to AKA, and also go listen to the other interview that I did with him, where we get into his ideas on satire and comedy. Jeff, immediate reactions to what Mike said.
AKA is his podcast. Do I have that right?
That's his most recent comedy album.
His most recent comedy album. Okay, cool.
All right. Mike is back. Let me add him back to the conversation. Mike.
Hey.
Can you hear us now?
I can hear and see you.
And we're back.
Beautiful.
And we're back. We were just
blown
away by your answer, and I just asked. My co-host is Jeff, by the way.
Hey, Jeff.
Hey, Mike. How you doing?
Jeff. Jeff and I are old friends. He lives in Tokyo. I used to live in Japan. We've known each other for 30 years at this point, maybe more. So he's here to help us out. So I just asked Jeff what he thought of your answer. So Jeff, the floor is yours.
That was an extensive and thought out answer. There's a lot going on there, and I think he touched on a lot of the same things that we were saying before. I mean, like earlier in the show, like the ideas about spirituality is maybe less inclined to the religious direction, and the religious is okay. I'm just making shit up now. It's time to move on to the next question.
All right. Well, Jeff has also curated all our questions. I haven't heard or seen or vetted any of them. Go ahead, Mike.
If I may as well add, I feel like there's a thing that I heard once. I think my girlfriend shared with me. I don't know the original source, but the idea is pertaining to like the idea that sometimes like there can be certain people of certain religions and certain people of no religions who might feel like that they're like judgment can be involved. Like whoever you are, you might think like people that don't do things the way that you do are doing things not as well. And you might express that outwardly. So the thing that I really like is be focused on your own soul and other people's stomachs. So like, live your life
stomachs
ethically. Yeah. Make sure that other people's stomachs are filled with enough food.
Filled. Yeah. Oh yeah.
So the idea being like, if I say that the people who do entwine religion and spirituality the most, like I think like Martin Luther King's a good example of someone who was a reverend and also was very active in striving to make the world, the material world, the physical realm as, as heaven-like, as kind, as compassionate, as joyful, as connected, all the things that you'd want from either a religion or a non-religion, like make the physical, the empirically, scientifically measurable world as good and fair and just and kind as possible. And as also like, if you want to be, if you connect that, like, so I feel like there's the closer you get to like the most of the practicing religious people that I know are also really, there is spirituality connected with it because, and you don't necessarily hear as much from them. Like I have a friend who is a minister at a church in Chicago, which is like, they call it a queer storytelling bar church. And it is super liberal.
Another one.
Oh, another one indeed. It's super progressive. It's super inclusive and welcoming. It's focused on, social justice and, equality for all. And there is, so her father is also a minister, I think, of a more like classically, conventionally conservative church community, and he's like a nice dude. And also she told me once that he said something like, like, gun to the head, would I say are gay people going to hell? I mean, he's like, but looking at the texts, like, but he's like, do I think people, am I preaching that? No. Do I think other people should be focusing on that? He's like,
okay,
no,
but then are you preaching what you believe?
I mean, and so what he was saying was, what he would preach is like, I feel like people should be out there with picket signs saying like, look within your own marriage, and like, that is like, concern yourself with your own soul, not with what other people are doing.
Sure.
And, and try to help other people have what they want and what they need. So there are people out there practicing in ways that I think are not overlapping religion and spirituality as much as one might want. But there are also people doing it a ton, and you're not hearing about it as much because they're not the loudest for good reason.
So then what about a person? I mean, those are generally like if it's the minister, so it's a default religious position, and that almost implies a spirituality. There are people who would say they're not religious, but they are spiritual. I don't know how many people you would find who would say they're not spiritual, but they are religious. So the religion is kind of covered, that base is covered in a way. But on the other side, if somebody does mushrooms and says that makes them spiritual, does that count?
I mean, I feel like the way you're asking the question, does it count?
Or does
I mean, I understand you could rephrase it, but to address it as such, but feel free to rephrase.
Is the act of taking mushrooms a spiritual practice in your view?
I would say that as a person who has done has had many experiences with psychedelic mushrooms, I would say that many of them, if not all, I won't say, I can't remember them all exactly right now. There have been they've been so numerous, but I would say that most of them, to answer the question, were they spiritual experiences or were they not spiritual experiences? I would say yes, they were. And so I say that if anyone says that they've had a spiritual experience on mushrooms, I would believe them. And if somebody said, I did mushrooms and I did not have a spiritual experience, I would believe them as well. Like the same way that I feel like I do stand-up comedy, and I think that stand-up comedy is an art form. And I know that it is weird. Like if I introduce myself to a new person, they're like, what do you do for a living? If I said, I'm an artist, and they said, oh, what kind of art do you make? Do you paint? Do you sculpt? Do you blow glass? You're like, oh no, the kind of art that I make is comedy. They might be like, that's a weird way to say that. And I would agree with them. But I think that there are comedians out there who are like, look, comedy's not an art form. I'm not an artist. I'm a craftsperson. And to them, I might disagree with them, but I'm not gonna argue with them. I'll be like, okay, you're not an artist then. That's fine. You don't have to be. And I feel like there is like sort of a spectrum from art to craft, and there is a spectrum from spirituality to religion that might be not an exact parallel. But yeah, I definitely think if somebody's just saying that they did mushrooms and had a spiritual experience, like I don't know whether they did or not, because that's the whole thing about a spiritual experience is it's internal. That's the main thing. Religion is external and spirituality is internal, and sometimes they're entwined.
Well, one of the things you said, which I'll just pre-shadow. Earlier we were talking about in the conversation before we brought you on, was that the word versus in the middle of religion versus spirituality is like also itself a kind of weird way to phrase it. Because they're not like Godzilla versus King Kong, But that is the way some people will say it. I mean, they'll say, I'm not a religious person, but I am spiritual. So people who say that are saying something.
I think that what they are saying, or the implication that I take, just to speculate, is that, I mean, the baggage that comes along for a lot of people with religion, like some people have been raised in oppressive religious environments, familially, culturally, So for some people, like the word church or God or religion has very different connotations than it does for somebody who is raised differently. And I
Sure.
think that makes a lot of sense. So when people, I'd say like the classic example of a person who was raised like, I'm not religious, but I am spiritual. Like perhaps they were raised in a religion that didn't resonate with them, with people who were yelling at them, like like I always think about this analogy, like when I was a child, sometimes we'd be whispering in class or in a meeting or something, like of the school or whatever, and our teachers would be like, shh, and they'd shush us so loudly, like louder than we were. And I feel like that's what so much of like discourse about, sometimes religion, sometimes politics is like the cure is sometimes, more poisonous than the symptom that's trying to be treated. If you're like, hey, stop being so, like somebody yelling to not be loud. You're like,
be
like
quiet.
And so I think that people perceive religion, and there's a lot of good reason that like religion has been the source of many wars and oppressions and inequalities, slaveries and such, justifying. And so there have been, when people are like, yeah, religion, not for me, but there is something like, I get that there's, some spark of humanity, of art, of communion, of beauty, of love, of life, that they're like, I get why religion is that for some people, but for me, a nun hurt me, or like like I was abused in the spirit by somebody saying that they were doing it because God wanted them to. And I'm like, that's not my jam, but I like meditating. That's my jam.
There we go. There we go.
We're kind of in the window of our last 10 minutes.
Sure.
So I would like to attempt to do what sometimes on other podcasts or shows is called a speed round. So Jeff, pick your 2 or 3 just favorite questions you really wanted to ask. And me and Mike will both try to give short, like 1 or 2 sentence answers. And we'll speed through. Okay, thank you, Mike. And Jeff, the responsibility
if evolution is true. If evolution is true and we're evolving to become smarter, then why are there still dumbasses? Like a lot of dumbasses.
Oh, I think it's that you don't understand how evolution works.
Right. Yes.
Okay.
Evolution is a process of good enough. You just have to live long enough to make babies. We don't all have to be Einsteins.
It could be that evolution is gearing people to having babies younger and younger. So all you have to be is perhaps more, attractive, more like pheromone inducing, like, juicier and juicier pheromones is what evolution is selecting for, not necessarily intelligence.
Right. There we go.
Thank
you.
All right. Next one.
If you could go back in time and meet an intelligent person like a Da Vinci or a Newton, would you be able to explain to them in a meaningful way what an iPhone is?
I'll answer yes, because I'm overly confident, but I secretly am not that confident.
Okay. I would say it depends how far back you go. The people I want to meet are French artists from the early 1900s, and science was relatively advanced by then. But if you're talking about ancient, like going back to Aristotle, I guess I'd love to talk to him. You would have a challenge on your hands.
I'll just add briefly, Da Vinci, I think, would have a good chance of getting it. But what if I would like to go back in time and talk to Steve Jobs about the iPhone so that he can invent it?
There we go. There we go.
If he understood.
Oh, yeah.
Yes. Okay. Jeff, 1 or 2 more.
What religious figure or spiritual figure would you most likely or like to have dinner with?
And is this a person that's alive, dead, or any?
Or in between? Yes, any of those.
I mean, I would love to meet or have met Thich Nhat Hanh or Pema Chodron or Ram Dass. Those are some of my top ones.
Those are my favorite rap albums.
And my quick off-the-cuff answer, really, and this shows my Judeo-Western upbringing, but frankly, Jesus. And I'm not being facetious. I mean, what he's quoted as saying, there's a lot of meaningful quotes and a lot of kindness. And I would love to hear, like, from his own words, how he'd represent those concepts. And not just to correct dumbasses of our age, but just to see, what he had to say, like, and bask in that, like Sermon on the Mount. Be there for Sermon on the Mount.
And I'll add number 1. I second that. I would also love to talk to Jesus. Also the Buddha, or any Buddhas really. And then also if you're interested in finding out what Jesus might say to the dumbasses of today. I don't know if you're familiar with, but check out John Fugelsang. He is a hilarious comedian, super smart, super funny, has read the Bible. I believe his mother, before having him, was a nun, and his father was a priest, and he is just so smart and kind and well educated on these subjects. I think he has read the Bible more than most people who believe the Bible.
Yeah. Friend of the show. He's been on the Comical Heathen, right?
Beautiful.
Yes. I love that guy.
Yeah. Fuck, marry, kill. Judaism, Christianity, Islam.
No, thank you.
Yeah, I pass.
I marry them all.
The question most likely to get cut from this edited program.
The edited version of this program. Okay. Well, give us a better one to end on, Jeff.
What do you think is the strongest argument for God's existence?
Well, the fact that you can define
Oh, you're breaking up there, Mike.
I think that am I okay now? Do you hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you.
All right. I think that the surest proof of or argument for God's existence is that you can define God however you wish, and if you define God as something that exists to you, then God exists. Like if God is love, if God is art, if God is togetherness, then beautiful. Like every religious person doesn't, every spiritual person doesn't believe. Like since there's a rabbi who told me once, he said, God does not exist. God is existence. And that resonates with me a lot.
Okay, nice. I'll just add that one of my favorite philosophers, Kierkegaard, was in a way the forerunner of the psychological turn that religion is a personal thing and not a dogmatic church thing. And I think that from that point of view begins the rise of the importance of faith as a definition of being religious. Because 200 years ago, you were religious by going to church. But Kierkegaard argued that you were religious by your faith in actually believing the things that you were claiming to believe. And he also added, as a footnote to that observation, that there's only about, in his opinion, not mine, about 1 in a million people then are probably religious. If you have to believe in your faith, if that's the definition of being religious, is that you actually believe in your faith. He doubted that more than 1 in a million people could match that test. Hey, so before we wrap up, it's very important for me to thank some people. First and foremost, thank you, Mike Kaplan, for joining us on this goofy Q&A.
Thank you, Mike.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Any fun things you want to plug coming up in the next 2 or 3 months?
Oh, sure. If people follow me at Mike Kaplan, spelled the weird way I spell it, MyQKaplan, on any social media, or go to my website, or I have a newsletter that comes out each week full of a few jokes, and then other places you can see me. That's at mikekaplan.substack.com. And you mentioned my album, AKA. All my albums are most of the places that you could want to listen to albums. And so, yeah, I hope there will be a number of things coming up. But yeah, the best way to find out what they are and where I'll be is to follow me and subscribe, and I'll let you know.
Right, and I'll make sure there's a link to your website in the description of this podcast.
Thank you.
My guest co-host, Jeff Geddert, who also produced and remixed our theme music. Thank you, Jeff Geddert, for joining us today and for such excellent music.
Thank you for having me. Glad you like it.
Excellent. And then thank you. A few people listen to the live stream, but we'll also release this as an episode of the podcast in a week or two. So thank you to anybody who listened to the episode and made it all the way to the end. Be sure to share with your friends and spread the word. And finally, I always like to just end on this thought. It may be your dogma, but it's my karma. And I'm all about spreading the love. Thank you, everybody. And cut.